Okay, this is basically a video to help walk you through replacing a half axle or CV axle for BMW 325. Mine's a 1989, basically an E30. First, to start off, what you need to do is take a rubber mallet and knock off this cap right here. You tap it and it gets it loose. You can pry it open. And then when I get to the nut segment, you need to remove the lock washer. There's a lock washer there that you pry out, and then you can loosen the nut and pull the nut off. Okay, here's the half axle, and basically once you've loosened that, remove the washer and loosen the nut from the wheel part, you'll go over here to the differential part underneath the car and remove all the bolts. Once you've removed all the bolts, you should be able to swing the half axle arm down and lower it away from the differential, and then you should be able to come back and then take like a brass rod or maybe a hard wood piece, a stick, and be able to tap this spline out of the wheel bearing here, and then push that gently out, and then you should be able to remove it, and then you'll have the old one out of the way. And alright, you can see that the half axle has been removed, and there's the flange going into the differential. Going to go ahead and remove that and replace the oil seal on the differential. Okay, here's the flange that I pulled out of the differential, and this was in the differential, and I mean there is some wear here, but it's not bad, so it said to look for a gouge, but I think it's going to be okay. I mean, for 200,000 miles, I'm going to go ahead and replace the seal on it. So, alright, and that's the differential, and you can see the seal that's in there now that I've removed the flange out of it. So I'm going to take a screwdriver and try and pry that out, and then I got to press the new one in. Okay, here's the old seal that went into the differential, and basically what I did was I just took I had a brass bar, and I just went underneath there and I pried. You can use a screwdriver too, just be careful with the hardened tip, and just pried it out from the differential. So okay, I have tapped in the new seal with a rubber mallet that I had. I just put it on there and gently tapped it in. Then I also used the brass bar to gently tap around the sides to try and make it as even as I can. Didn't want to go too much below that metal to make it flush with the edge there, so we should be set to go. Okay, I put some oil on the seal where it's going to rub up against the flange as it goes in there, and I worked it back and forth and pushed it in, and gently tapped on it with the rubber mallet to get it in. So now I've got the flange in place, and my gasket's been changed, and now I need to install the rebuilt axle. Here's my old axle that was removed, and you can see right here the boot has failed, the inner boot. Not a whole lot of grease had come out, but eventually, dirt gets in there and then it will fail. So not a good idea to be driving around with it. So went ahead and ordered a remanufactured one. Here's a Surtec one that I had actually ordered first. It's made in China. The one thing it did have, it had extra like little, what do I call it, ridges in the boot, which allows more flexing. But the problem is, when I went to go install it, the bolts were too long for this. This is shorter, and it actually went into the differential, so I couldn't use it. And plus, they gave me the wrong size bolts to go with it. So gonna have to send that one back and get my money back. I already contacted the vendor that sold it to me. So anyway, here's the remanufactured one I'll be installing. It's a Cardone, and this cap comes off, and I need to go ahead and, as you can see, pack the grease in here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we'll get ready to install it. Okay, I packed the end of the axle that goes into the differential. I put the cap back on. I packed it full of grease, that is. I've gone ahead and put the screws back in. These are new screws that I bought locally here because I didn't get or the bolts from the person that the company that remanufactured this particular axle. It's probably a good idea to go ahead and replace them if you can. And then I've gone ahead and put all these in place. It'll be easier to bolt on. So we're pretty much ready to install. So the end with the boots are going to go here with the bolts. Screw into that flange from the differential that we just put back into the differential after changing the oil seal. And this is the wheel. The back end of the wheel, you can see where the brake lining runs and the ABS sensor and so forth. Basically, in order to get it in and out, of course, we had to loosen the strut there and push it aside. So on this particular side, we do have the exhaust, which makes it a little bit more difficult. This is the driver's side or the left side of the car, and so it needs to pretty much kind of snake through this, and then there's a little swing arm here. So I'm going to go ahead and install it, and going to go ahead and basically slide the piece in with the spline there, and then we go ahead and bolt it up all the way over there to the flange part on the differential. So let me go ahead and do that. Okay, I was finally able to get the outside spline in to the wheel bearing, and had to use some brute and use this brass rod here that I have, and just tapped in the side and turned it gently, and after a little bit of time I was able to get it in. So basically all I really need to do now is lower the wheel down and reconnect the strut here and connect that. Then on the inner part of the axle that connects to the differential, basically once you have the outer lined up and in the bolt on and not necessarily torqued down, you just line this up here and start putting in the bolts along with those little tabs that are in here, and start torquing all the way around until you get those, and then you torque them down to the recommended foot-pounds. Just a little side note, this hanger here, you might want to disconnect this hanger if you're on the muffler side, and this will let the muffler drop a little bit lower. Just be careful that the muffler doesn't drop with the hangers further back on that. That gives you a little bit more room to work. Mine was actually worn, and it actually broke during the process, and I'm going ahead and replacing it with a new one. Now would be also a good time to replace those back hangers as well. And then the last part is just torquing down the axle nut to the correct recommended foot-pounds or Newton-pounds, however you want to go, metric or English system. And depending, you might have a self-locking nut, or if you have the original BMW nut, then replace that with a lock washer. And I'll show you that in a second. Here's the original BMW nut, and it has a collar on it, and here's a lock washer, and that's a brand new one, and this is the old one. And basically you tighten it down to the recommended torque, and then you slide this on and tap it in place, and then it locks around the nut, like that, more or less. And there's grooves, as you can see. I'll show you back again where the axle, where the nut goes into the axle, and this locks in place. This doesn't turn, and it locks around the nut, and the nut doesn't turn. It keeps it in place. You have to take a screwdriver when you pull this out, and I actually had to drill it right here to get something underneath it to get it out, but that's basically how that works. Here's one of those rear muffler hangers. You can see the rubber O-ring, and mine's getting a little bit worn, so probably need to go ahead and replace it. Like I said, I bought 2 new ones. And here's what a new one looks like, and you can probably see the other one has stretched pretty much, so it's still good and still works, but it's probably getting near the end of its life.